I will talk about this more next week, but I sure hope you know what a fantastic, unique, and special church Manchester United Methodist is. I mean, this coming weekend, we're going to have scads of youth going to Spirit Camp, an annual event where lives may very well be changed. Some may even enter into ordained ministry because of the hard work and love that this church provides for our youth. This week, if you haven't noticed, we have an entire universe swirling in the lobby, and that's part of a vacation Bible school that will welcome hundreds of kids, so many volunteers as well. It's just going to be an amazing week. That's just what this church does. Last Wednesday at Busch Stadium, 300 of my closest friends here came out to just celebrate, have a good time, and to laugh at me throwing the first pitch. Speaking of that, let me share a memory. I remember the shadows falling over Busch Stadium as I strode to the mound. I looked in for the sign. John Brebbia, my special catcher, signaled a fastball, two-seamer, inside corner. I looked the runner back, and I blistered the ball in. It would have taken out the guy's knees, but it was knee high, and it hit the glove. I looked at the radar gun. 9.5. I looked more closely. 9.5. If that. But thank you for indulging me that moment, because did you know, when I was but a kid playing sandlot ball in southeast Missouri, I always dreamed of going to Busch Stadium and playing and being actually on the field. I didn't know it was going to take me half a century, but I was there. It was something that, I fantasized about along with the other boys that I played ball with, standing in against Bob Gibson and Carlton and company, even seeing Stretch McCovey and Richie Allen, of course. All of that. And have you noticed that when you're young, especially, you are forward-looking? It's sort of like the wait until I get my driver's license, or wait until I graduate, or wait until I go to college, or wait until I get that job, or wait until I find that special someone. Have you ever noticed that we are naturally bent on waiting until? And those are wonderful anticipatory events that fuel us, that drive us, that make us passionate. And have you ever noticed that oftentimes when you actually hit one of those events, you bask in the glory and you enjoy it just like a new car? But just like a new car, as weeks fade into months, so does the luster fade just a bit. It reminds me of that one of my favorite poems by the American poet Robert Frost. I'm sure many of you have heard it, but it goes, "Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay." Nothing gold can stay. Never does. And so the question is, how can we live that we're in such a way that we're not bound by the next great thing, the next wait until? How can we be so graced to live truly in the moment, or as Henry Nouwen said in his book, to live in the here and now? So what I'd like to share with you today are a couple of passages from Paul, two of his more famous passages in letters that he wrote, to give us some guidance as to how we might be able to break that cycle of wait until. Marnie's going to read the first passage that comes from one of his several letters that he sent to the church at Corinth. Please listen.
I was given a thorn in my body because of the outstanding revelations I've received, so that I wouldn't be conceited. It's a messenger from Satan sent to torment me so that I wouldn't be conceited. I pleaded with the Lord 3 times for it to leave me alone. He said to me, "My grace is enough for you, because power is made perfect in weakness." So I'll gladly spend my time bragging about my weaknesses so that Christ's power can rest on me. Therefore, I'm all right with weaknesses, insults, disasters, harassments, and stressful situations for the sake of Christ, because when I'm weak, then I'm strong.
That's a curious image he uses, a thorn in the flesh. Literally, it's a splinter that gets embedded under the skin and cannot be extracted. And it's at a place that's always painful, so that you're reminded of it every day. Some folks speculate as to what Paul's thorn in the flesh was. Some say, and I think this is probably true, it was an onset of blindness. His eyes were failing, because in one of his letters he writes, "See with what big letters I write." Others say that it might be epilepsy or headaches, migraines, what have you. But it's not so important as to what the thorn was, but why he had a thorn to begin with. He who through the Spirit was able to heal others could not heal himself. And as Paul put it so very well, remembering this thorn that afflicts me every day, I'm reminded of my weakness so that I also might be reminded of Christ's strength. That is a beautiful lesson that is so difficult for us to learn, because we often think that life and even our discipleship is about us, don't we? That it's like as we are successful, as we get to the next wait until, and we feel good about what we've done, we sort of think it is about us. It's like, look at me and what I've accomplished. But for Paul, he says, if you're a Christian, it's not about you and what you've accomplished. It is about Christ and what he has given you. Because it's always about life being given to us beyond our merit. It's about the treasures, the heavenly treasures that are given in a very earthy way. When we devote ourselves into following this master, the mysterious master, then we discover that our life takes on a depth that's much deeper than the shallow wading pool of the world. We are connected more profoundly and more authentically to God and to one another, and all those words that are words become reality, like joy, peace, hope, grace. And we start sensing our own unique callings, not because it's something that I can do, but it's something that Christ has called you to do and given you the talent to be a spokesperson for justice and compassion and of inclusivity. That is the joy that we get not by what we do, but what we have been given. So when we have our thorn in the flesh, as Paul says, we are humbled, and that's good. Because when you're humbled, you are grateful. And when I look at those two words that you see on the screen, humility and gratefulness, I think of a sports figure. Here's a question. If you have heard of Dan Quisenberry, hold up your hand. Dan Quisenberry. Look at you sports fans. Well done. Well done. You will know that he was a star relief pitcher for the major league team, the Kansas City Royals. Parenthetically, I remember the 1985 World Series. We'll go back now. And he was an amazing pitcher, 3-time All-Star. You ought to be in the Hall of Fame. Just a great guy. And I was privileged once to talk to him. Now, one of the things about Quisenberry was he had that unique delivery, as you can see here, almost going all the way down to the ground. But that was unique to him. Quite a talent. Quite a talent. And as I was talking with him, I was curious, and I started the interview like any good interviewer should, with a generic question. Something that would get him talking so that we could hone in on wherever he was to go in the conversation. So I asked him, Dan, what is the secret of your success? And I was fully anticipating him saying, well, it's hard work, or it's God-given talent that I'm thankful for, or it's coaches and all the people who've supported me. He didn't say any of that. What he said was, in response to what is the key to your success, he said, luck. And that was a conversation stopper, not starter for me. No ball player says, I'm just lucky. It's always, something about what they did, what they accomplished, their trophies, their skill, all of this stuff. So I asked him, why would you say that? Look, and he went on to say, well, I'm just lucky to be here because I know there are so many ball players in the minor leagues that are better pitchers than me, and they'll never get a chance to be here. I'm just lucky that somehow I got a chance and I'm here and that I've been able to stay. And I said to myself, how refreshing is this? That here's a guy who's not puffed up about himself, that he knows that for whatever reason, he was blessed to be able to be with the Royals in a great championship season even, and to enjoy that. Humility and gratefulness characterize Dan Quisenberry. Unfortunately, Dan was taken away from us way too soon because at the young age of 48, he had brain cancer and died. But in his latter years, after he retired from baseball before his death, he became a bit philosophical. He started writing, do some poetry, and he coined an interesting phrase that I'll share with you. When you're a pitcher, a major league pitcher, and you start going south and you start having your ERA balloon up, you start looking at video, studying video, to see if you can pick up a flaw in your mechanics. Maybe the arm angle or what have you. And if you do, then you correct it, and you will say to reporters, when they ask you, well, what happened? How did you do better? You will answer, I found a flaw in my delivery. Standard line. Dan Quisenberry had as his catch line in his latter years, not I found a flaw in my delivery. His phrase was, I found a delivery in my flaw. I found a delivery in my flaw. I have a thorn in the flesh that's made me weak, and then I have become strong. And that leads, when we are humbled, to that profound sense of living right now, gratefully, just lucky to be here. And that can stop that cycle of just wait untils. So that's the first thing that Paul, I think, would say to us. Don't kick against the thorn. Let the thorn humble you to let you understand that when you are weak, that's when life becomes sweetest, because that's when Christ can be the strongest for you. Here's a second lesson, another passage that, Marnie, I'd ask you to read now, that comes in a different situation, and it's addressed to the church at a place called Philippi.
I was very glad in the Lord because now at last you have shown concern for me again. Of course you were always concerned, but had no way to show it. I'm not saying this because I need anything, for I have learned how to be content in any circumstance. I know the experience of being in need and of having more than enough. I have learned the secret to being content in any and every circumstance, whether full or hungry, or whether having plenty or being poor. I can endure all these things through the power of the one who gives me strength. Still, you have done well to share my distress.
Thank you. Now, in the New Revised Standard Version of it, one of those verses would have popped right out at you because you hopefully have heard that in some other fashion. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And that's Paul. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. What is missed is the way that that passage begins and how it ends. The beginning of the passage is when he said, "You have shared your concern about me. You've thought about me. You've cared for me." What happened was the church took up a collection for Paul because he was in prison awaiting trial and he had to pay his own expenses. So the church took up a big offering and gave it to him. You've done well to, thank you so much for sharing your concern about me. And then he goes on in typical Pauline fashion to say, but of course, Christ is all I need. I can endure all things through him who strengthens me. But then he ends by saying, still, it is good that you shared my distress. Read between those lines, friends. How is Paul able to be strengthened by Christ? Because he was loved by Christ's people, who took up an offering, who prayed for him, who cared for him. So, to live fully today, to be fully present today, as you're humble and grateful, then be very attentive to the needs of those around you. We'll call it, be sure to serve life, which, interestingly enough, was the name of a documentary that aired back in 2011, Serving Life. And you see that on the screen of a convict sitting on a chair at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. If you were a convict sentenced to Louisiana State Penitentiary, you did something really, really, really bad. Because most, I guess, maybe if not all, of the prisoners at Louisiana State are serving life sentences, hence the phrase serving life. Some are serving multiple life sentences. Some have life sentences without parole. These are not Sunday school teachers, bad people. And so if you are sentenced there, odds are you're not going to get out of there. You will die at Louisiana State Penitentiary. And the warden, and this is what the documentary was about, but the warden came up with an idea. He saw these inmates who are dying and no families to go back to or to claim. And he came up with a hospice program where prisoners, fellow inmates, would minister to these dying convicts. And it was an amazing program because of these hardened souls, people who have done bad things and are unrepentant for the most part and just down on life with horrible backgrounds. Transformation happened. As a prisoner would simply sit with a dying prisoner and talk, help with bodily functions even, maybe give a gift or two of some compassionate manner. And the simple act of being there and of loving in a concrete way, in serving life in a different way, was transformative. That the end of one of the inmates' life, they could be moved by love. And the one sharing that love was moved as well. And even though they were still in prison, in a more important way, they were liberated in their hearts and in their souls. Because that's the power of being attentive to someone's distress and simply being kind. When you hear stories of people who are caught up with a just cause or caught up with the needs of others, then you see people who may be the happiest people in the whole world. I looked over resources that I had, and I found real-life examples of people who can serve life, like I'm talking about. There's a Christian who felt compelled to convene a small group of religious and civic leaders to address what he saw as being a lack of ethnic diversity in his small town. He was adamant about it. This was his calling, and in so doing, the mayor and other leaders got involved in the group, and awareness was raised regarding racism, affordable housing, and jobs. There was a Lutheran pastor here in St. Louis who was really caught up with trying to provide adequate housing for low-income folks and families. And a person noticed that this pastor's shoes had holes in them. And so this person gave an anonymous $250 gift card to a shoe store and gave it to the pastor anonymously. And the pastor saw the gift card. His face brightened. He said, "This is a miracle. It's a miracle." Because just this morning, there was a mother who was concerned that her children would not have new shoes to start the school year. So he gave it to her. Happily. Serving life. Or like this retired couple who was invited to go down to Mexico to provide hurricane relief at a certain area after one of the devastating hurricanes there. And they were so moved by what they experienced and who they connected with. They were so moved that they decided every year that was going to be their ministry. And they would go down, they made connections, and any stereotypes about Mexicans totally blown out of the water. They were serving life. Or it's like a retired pastor who became disabled and was wondering, now, what can I do? What kind of difference can I make? He learned to do email. And he took advantage of technology as best he could to continue reaching out, sending emails, cards, letters, intercessory prayer, doing whatever he could, because that's how he was serving life. How will you serve life? To be attentive to someone's distress and to cheer them in some way authentic to you. Opportunities abound. You know, I found myself over these last few weeks of sort of looking back. I guess that's what you do at this stage of your ministry. Looking back over the 9 years here, and as I was doing that, there was one couple and a conversation I had with a couple that really stood out in my mind. Of the many incidences I could quote. But this particular couple, I'll call them Bob and Carol, had just joined the church. This was several years ago. And shortly after joining, they contacted me to have a conversation. So they came to the office, sat down with them, and Carol said, "Well, we just wanted you to know that Bob has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. We don't know what the future is going to hold, how that's going to play out in his life, but we thought you should know. And we also wanted you to know that this is not going to stop us one bit from being active in this church. We're going to get involved fully." And so they did. Bob and Carol became deeply involved in a small group that accompanied them in Bob's eventual decline in health until his death just about a year ago or so. And in the process of that, Bob and Carol, received such love. And in turn, they gave back such love. Because that's what happens when you are attentive to serving life today around you. And I will always remember the way our conversation ended that first time that I talked with them. As they were just about out the door, Carol stopped and she looked at me and she said, "I want you to know, Pastor Greg, God's not finished with us yet. I want you to know, brothers and sisters here at Manchester United Methodist Church, God's not finished with you yet either."